I'm Aaron. I'm a staff engineer here at Intercom. I'm on team front-end tech. The subject of Ember at Intercom has been spoken about numerous times. Probably not so much in the last couple of years, but there's certainly a number of talks online that you can find. So I wanted to give things just a little bit of a different spin and from a slightly different perspective. I wanted to look through the lens of supporting an Ember application from the perspective of my team, front-end tech, which is essentially a developer enablement and productivity team. I wanted to tell you about how my team came to be and the ways that we have impact while trying to support a 9-year-old Ember app that's being worked on by more than 150 engineers, and some of the challenges that we faced along the way. So while this talk isn't specifically about Ember, I hope you get an insight into what it takes for teams such as mine to support the Ember app, or ours, to support the Ember app of this scale. So first, just a little bit of history. Most people think of Intercom as Messenger, which it generally is to end users. It's a business messenger that people can use to talk to support agents in different companies. But it's loads more than that. The bulk of the front-end code is in an Ember app that you can think of more like an inbox. Support agents manage all conversations in an inbox-like style. But it's more than that. We have bot automations, we have reporting, we have contacts and user management, we have outbound engagement and things like that. So it's an all-in-one support platform. And this is what is the bulk of the code in an Ember app, separate to the messenger. In fact, each one of these sections in the nav bar could be a full-blown application in its own right. They each contain loads and loads of features and are worked on by dozens of engineers. So back in 2012, Intercom started off as a Rails app. As it grew, naturally, it became more and more complex, and features became harder to ship fast. It became a situation where you'd fix one thing over here and something over here would break. And in 2014, Gavin Joyce, shout out to Gav. Apologies if this is historically inaccurate. Gavin and a small team of 2 engineers were given the opportunity to spike out a page in Ember to see if it could provide any improvements to the developer experience and simplify things. They took the user list page, which back then I believe looked something like this, and time boxes spiked to 3 weeks. Turns out they were able to rebuild that page in 1.5 weeks, and as a result, we're able to implement a number of new features. So as you can imagine, the product org were super impressed about the speed that the team was able to build this page and then build new features on top. Looking at an old talk of Gav's, he mentioned at that point that he estimated about 10 to 12 times less code and about 30 to 50 times less complexity in that page alone. So began the process of incrementally porting the Intercom app and its respective parts over to Ember and educating the engineers along the way, because up to this stage, they were mostly all Rails engineers. Legend has it there were echoes of "this is too easy, where is all the code, and this is fucking amazing" throughout the office. The productivity boost that Ember gave them on a daily basis was clear, as evidenced by company-wide weekly show and tells, where teams were consistently demonstrating the features that they were shipping. So over the following 9 years, we've seen the app grow immensely, as did the number of engineers working on it. So I did some git foo over the last few weeks. Our app's roughly about 700,000 lines of code. We have now more than 150 engineers contributing to it. So this is the number of unique contributors over each year. At the end of each year, they've done at least merged at least one pull request into the code base. So you can see by 2022, we're up to 155 engineers across 30 teams, more than 30 teams. A number of routes has steadily increased. We obviously removed a few features, which is nice over here. And a number of components has shot right up. Like we're up to 3,300. So you can start to imagine how, as these numbers go up, dedicated focus and attention needs to be put to ensuring that things stay up to date and that dependencies and patterns move forward and modernize. And this becomes much more work than a single motivated engineer or a small set of engineers can do on the side between product work. So you can see here we've got 62,500 PRs merged since this repo was created. And in the last week, there was 228 pull requests merged. So it's about 45 a day, not including weekends. So when we say we're an enablement team, what do we actually mean? Well, let's think of the sorts of things we all need to do at some point that aren't strictly product work and the sorts of things that come into play as your app scales like this. So does anyone have any examples of tasks that kind of happen in like that aren't directly related to product work? I'll help you out. So there's a bunch of things that you don't necessarily think of, like build speed improvements, adding new lint rules, fixing flaky tests, observability, deployment, developing and spreading opinions across your engineers, education, support, pairing, CI test improvements. There's a load of stuff that doesn't neatly fit into I'm building these product features, but they need to happen. These things that kind of tend to happen organically when the teams are small and the app is small. But as they scale, they quickly become a source of drag and toil for engineers. And if left without being addressed, they can become a source of demotivation, a lack of pride, and an inhibitor to speed. So in short, at some point, they become blockers to shipping fast, early and often. Which brings me to this. Before we talk about the what and the how of what Team Front-End Tech does, it's important to look at the perspective of why. And that comes down to something that the entire company values greatly, all the way up to the CEO, and that's the speed of shipping things. So you may have heard other intercomrades talk about, like, shipping is our heartbeat, and we talk about cupcakes a lot, like working out what the smallest thing of value is that we can ship to customers to learn, get feedback. So you can see it right here, ship fast, early and often. It's one of our core R&D principles. And this is something we strive for constantly and frames very clearly why my team exists. So this is something, when the speed you can build and ship your product to your users gives you an edge, then would you rather your product engineers be bogged down with these extracurricular things, or would you rather have a dedicated team to take care of those and grease the wheels, enabling your product engineers to build product? That's why Team Front-End Tech exists. So, but we didn't start out this way. Team Front-End Tech hasn't always existed. In fact, when I was talking to Pat, another staff engineer on my team, who's been here pretty much since the start, I think he was one of the original engineers. We identified there's probably 4 distinct stages that we've gone through to get to where we are today, which is quite interesting, and I'd be interested to see if you can kind of identify where you folks might be in here. I'd be curious to see if there's any similarities. So stage 1 was sort of like a product engineer doing the work on the side in between features when they get a moment. Code base is pretty small at this stage. Upgrades are easy. There aren't too many engineers, so like the developer experience, the feedback loop is all nice and pleasurable, and it feels great. Upgrades are easy. Stage 2, we saw was a product engineer was part of a large product team and maybe got the responsibility to do this enablement work. It's slightly better than stage 1, but theoretically, they're given the space to do the enablement work, but in reality, they're often pulled away to do product work as pressure hits and timelines tight. They often end up having fractured days and not really feeling like they get to have a good run at the enablement stuff. So they can finally end up snacking because they need to find small, low-effort things to be able to slot in between the product work. So a quick tangent, what do I mean by snacking? Let's visualize the idea of impactful work on this 2x2 graph. We've got like effort versus impact. So basically the top right here represents your company strategy. It's where the hard but meaningful work exists, and this is what really drives the company forward when you're doing stuff in this quadrant. The bottom right, we just want to steer clear of that. Low impact, low effort, stay clear away from that. But the top left represents where everyone loves hanging out. It's like the low effort, high impact stuff. And early on, there's a fair bit of stuff here to do, and it feels great, but it quickly dries up as the product matures and the team matures. But this is where kind of we found stage 1 kind of operates. You've got lots of nice low hanging fruit to bite off, and stage 2 as well. But then stage 2 starts to have a tendency to slip down into the bottom left quadrant, which is low effort and low impact. So it's this quadrant that can kill you because it's so attractive. It's referred to here as snacking because it feels rewarding. It can solve a short-term problem, but when you never eat anything of substance, then you'll eventually suffer. So at this stage, the low effort, high impact stuff that has dried up, but the engineers don't have the space to focus on any of the longer term, higher impact things. So they snack on low impact things, or worse, don't get any focus time to do any of the enablement tasks at all. So moving on from there, we started to have this sort of shape, stage 3, where a small sub-team is within a larger product team who's responsible for the enablement. So the small sub-team is responsible within a larger team. And this is becoming more promising. However, this team doesn't get to act as a proper team. They often don't have their own identity. They don't have an EM or a roadmap or their own process and rituals and such. They can often be pulled back into product engineering as well. Stage 3 tend to operate down here as well. Where we really want to be is up here in the top right, the high impact, high effort stuff. So that's kind of stage 4, which is a dedicated enablement team with their own identity, EM, roadmap, success metrics, and their own destiny. That's where stage 4 comes in. And this is currently where Team Front-End Tech sit, at the top right quadrant, where we can act as a real force multiplier for other engineering teams, where we have the scope and trust to tackle the bigger, more widespread issues and high impact issues that affect the whole engineering org. There's alerts there for someone. I'm pretty sure this will evolve in time. It's not static, but this is where we currently are. This is our current incantation based on us evolving the front-end enablement piece over the last 9 years. So we're a small team of 4 engineers with a dedicated EM. We have a team charter, our own roadmap, cycle goals, measurements for success, team offsites, all that sort of good stuff that a team has. So what is Team Front-End Tech? As I mentioned, we have our own identity. We've spent time crafting a team charter, and the mission gives a pretty good idea of what we're about. We supercharge product teams by providing world-class tools, education, and guidance, enabling them to deliver value and accelerating them through the UI lifecycle. As a result of our work, teams are hyper-productive in evolving our product to provide continuous measurable value for our customers. So we're a force multiplier for the engineering teams across Intercom. At a recent offsite, we decided that we needed a team logo. So like we plugged some stuff into Midjourney, as most people do, and it didn't really give us much. And then we kind of settled on the concept of a Lego rubber duck. We thought it was a fitting symbol for what we do and who we are. So we help break up large problems into smaller pieces and give other engineers the tools to build amazing products. And we often act as like a sounding board for engineers to bounce stuff off and pair with and to unblock them to help them move faster, rubber ducking with them along the way. We have a few different ways on how we decide what to work on. Essentially, our customers are the other engineers in the company. So the most reliable inputs come from them directly. See, when you're dealing with engineer productivity and happiness, things can sometimes get a little bit fluffy, but we try and capture the sentiment and the pain points of our engineers through surveys. So we pull a bunch of questions together on a regular basis and try and give our engineers a place to let us know where the main source of pain points are. We generally put a call out in Slack, as you can see here, every half to encourage engineers to let us know how they're feeling and what's good and what's bad. And we get valuable feedback too. So here we can see satisfaction was quite low, mostly around CI times and testing times. So we do get some really great feedback, and this is one of the really important inputs into deciding what it is that we actually do. And in response to that, we actually prioritize work that resulted in a 50% decrease in the CI runtimes and 30% reduction in broken builds, blocking deployments, and I'll show a bit about that further on. Side note, a broken CI pipeline here is considered a P1. So anytime the pipeline's red, that means our engineers can't ship anything. And remember, shipping is a heartbeat, so if you can't ship, well, we know what happens when your heart stops. So there's no better way to understand how engineers are feeling than to embed ourselves in their team for a number of weeks and to build products with them. Tours mean we'll integrate ourselves with another team for like a cycle or so, and we'll just learn how they do things and get a really good idea of the code base that they're working in, what sorts of things are troubling them. It's a great way to stay grounded in the reality of product engineering and to find out where the high impact improvements are. There's also an element of intuition needed. Unlike product engineers that are kind of generalists, we don't hire Ember specialists or Rails specialists. We've been hired as deep experts in Team Front-End Tech, front-end engineering, and Ember in particular. So we kind of keep involved in what's going on in the community, keep a finger on the pulse of what's coming up and what's going to make our engineers' lives better. So there's an element of that too. So let me give you a few more concrete examples of some of the things we've put in place to support our Ember app that's 9 years old. So I-18 is a great example of widespread cross-cutting pieces of work. Like sure, in the early days of an app, it'd be like, yo, just install Ember Install and be done with it. But when you get an app of our scale, it's not really that simple. With 9 years of bare strings and all sorts of number formatting and duration formatting and stuff, we had a lot of stuff we needed to sort out. So this was a year-long project, and it just doesn't fit clearly with any one product team. So examples of things we need to work out in something like this that you don't necessarily think of. We need to work out a translation provider. What happened there, Alex? Okay. Who are we going to use? Do we do it internally? Do we have a third-party service? Like work out the translation workflow. How do we make sure we don't impact engineers' velocity and ability to ship stuff? We don't want them waiting around for translations to come in. We had to liaise with the design org to help them understand how important thinking about localization, the design point is. analyzing code base to see what needs localizing. We had umpteen numbers of ways of formatting different currencies and numbers, and we needed to consolidate them. Teaching engineers about UI, ICU message syntax, and adding things like a GitHub action to tell teams when there's new translations for them, for their team to merge in. So we added loads of guidance and education around for engineers and changing the mindset about localization, how they need to work from a localization first perspective. For most of the engineers, it was a new concept. They've not been thinking about localization for 9 years, and all of a sudden we're saying, hey, you need to think about this stuff when you're building things. We built stuff to help devs know what's left to localize on a page. This is a great example of the low effort, high impact changes. So over here is just the normal page. Over here, if you put a query parameter, all the localized strings turn into the hamster emoji. So it's very clear when you see plain text on the page, that hasn't been localized yet. So it's just a little quality of life tool that engineers could use when they looked at a page and go, oh, we need to localize this. But it's not going to be able to do this widespread sort of change on the side in between product features. Would your company let the product team stop for a whole year to do this? Probably not. Embroider is another great example. We first started investigating this in 2019. It's still going on. We're not on Embroider in production. We're now leaning into the Embroider Strike team, and we're leaning heavily into helping move it forward. It's only possible because there's going to be a massive force multiplier for our engineers' workflow, and my team has been given the focus to be able to lean in here. We built a couple of little GitHub bots as well that comment on people's PRs to teach them and encourage them about lint rules. So we have lintbot that gives them a friendly little nudge when they introduce a disabled comment for a lint rule. Obviously, it's not ideal, but we do need them to ship code, and that's important too. So we send them a link to the actual lint rule itself. It doesn't stop them from shipping, but it's a little friendly nudge in the right direction. And more recently, we built Brightspot bot that we built to shine a light on the folks that do remove lint violations. We really want to encourage and praise the engineers for helping move the code base forwards in the future. So maybe some of you folks have been pinged by Brightspot bot. Pulse is a component library we've built for engineers to help speed up the workflow, giving them Lego blocks to build things. Engineers get huge mileage out of this, and it really lets them focus on building product instead of sweating on small details of how to implement popovers and dropdowns and things like that. Not all of our engineers are familiar with Ember or even front-end development, so we act as a sounding board for many engineers where they have questions and are stuck. We often pair with folks to unblock them. Remember, it's all about speed of shipping. We're enabling engineers, we're there to unblock them. So this is just an example of a few messages. We have a front-end tech channel. People can come in here and reach out, hey, I need help with this. I'm not sure how to do this. Can you help me fix this test? And we're there to unblock them and grease the wheels for them. So a portion of our time spent answering questions and pairing with our engineers to unblock them. But we also run dedicated Ember onboarding sessions for new starters and any existing engineers that want it. So we've spent a lot of time putting a really great onboarding session together. CI speed's a common piece of feedback we get in our velocity surveys too. We run all our tests over 210 buckets. We split it across AWS. And a great example of one of the changes we put in, Pat and Mandy made recently. We use Ember Exam to split the buckets across the 210, but it doesn't always do it in a very efficient way. And acceptance tests are much slower than component tests, and they're slower than unit tests. And some buckets were taking 4 minutes, others were taking 12 minutes. And there was a big disparity, and unfortunately your test run is only as fast as your slowest test bucket. So this was quite a source of pain. You don't need to worry about this, so this is Honeycomb, but basically Pat and Mandy put in some changes to basically send up to Honeycomb the different test modules, how long they took, and how many tests were being run within it. And this became really super powerful because we can start to see the longer running modules had loads of tests in them. So we shipped a fix. It was crude, but we basically came up with a number of tests that is kind of allowable in a test module and had a lint rule for it. And then we went and split up the tests that had more than that. As I said, it's crude, but it worked. The test balance was reduced significantly. It wasn't perfect, but it improved the overall efficiency. So you can see here's our buckets again, and we're looking at 2.3 seconds there. So it's between 2 and 4 minutes, down from 12. So you can do the maths over 150 engineers, the number of times that we're building in CI, that's a huge improvement across the board. Like all teams, we have a fair few challenges. For starters, our code base is pretty huge. It's the biggest one I've ever worked on. It always blows my mind whenever I pull a minute later, there's more changes to pull down. It's just, you can't keep up. When we introduce new patterns, it's impossible for us to go back and refactor everything. Like, it'd be great to be able to go, let's get rid of Ember object and use native classes, but it's just not possible. We naturally end up with varying patterns and multiple ways to do things depending on what part of the code you look at. It can be tricky to work out the best way to tackle some of these things. So, we have a lot of work to do still. And this is just one of the challenges when we get to a large code base. Because of the scale of the code base, it's not always feasible for my team to make the changes. Some of this hasn't been touched in years. Sometimes some of the features, there's probably no one in the company that even knows how they work. And some of it just needs human input and discretion. There's just no way our team can know how it all works. But selling the changes to product teams to prioritize among their product work can be kind of tricky. It's not always obvious to teams or EMs why refactoring and modernizing a bit of code is beneficial to them. So it's the future productivity boost of having a modern code base versus the immediate value of product features. So we need to be pragmatic about how we tackle things and try and provide the tools and the guidance for the engineers to make the changes easy for them. And selling the work that we want to do or know we should do to higher ups when it's tricky to measure and justify, this can be a bit of a challenge sometimes. It really comes down to trust over time though. We've built up a lot of trust and have a record of delivering high impact changes across the engineering org. So we don't have too much trouble pitching some of the things that we know in our gut is important to do. But the nature of this shape of work often means you take a loan from the trust banks that we've built up, which is hopefully paid off at the end when we see the eventual impact land. And happiness and satisfaction can be fluffy things and hard to measure. So we use developer velocity surveys and satisfaction surveys to try and gauge the sentiment for how productive and happy engineers are, but this can always be tricky. It's easy to measure dollars coming in and dollars going out, but how happy your engineers are can be tricky. So in summary, we highly value engineer productivity and being able to ship our product to customers at speed. Our Ember code base is over 9 years old now. It's over 700,000 lines long. We have more than 150 engineers working on it. We don't have a lot of juice left to squeeze in the low effort, high impact quadrant. And as a result, front-end tech is a team dedicated to greasing the wheels for our engineers. We're given the time and space to focus on those high effort, high impact things that are force multipliers for our engineering teams across the org. So we engage with our customers, the engineers, regularly through surveys and tours and regular pairing and working groups to understand the areas where we can provide the greatest impact for them. We strive to supercharge product teams by providing world-class education, guidance, enabling them to deliver value and accelerating them through their product development lifecycle. Do we have any questions? 6 minutes for questions.
Yeah, so you talk about these quadrants. Is there any time when you're not quite sure which quadrant you're in? Like, are you thinking, oh, maybe I'm in high effort, but actually by the end of it, you've spent 2 weeks and it's actually lower impact than you expected? How often do you know exactly which of those 4 quadrants you're in?
Like we're not constantly thinking about those quadrants. That was more of a way to illustrate sort of where the work can be and the level of impact. But I guess one of the benefits of our team is that we can spend that time in that kind of top right quadrant, looking at those longer term things. But it's not the only thing we do either. Like we are looking for smaller things that we can ship sooner and little pockets of impact. So I don't know, we're constantly reevaluating things, and it'd be very unlike us to spend a whole bunch of time and realize, oh crap, that didn't land. We're kind of pretty good now at kind of breaking things down and reevaluating consistently and regularly. But it's not like we've had this chart on the wall all the time.
Just given how fast the Intercom repo has grown in the last few years, do you worry in a few years' time the repo will be getting too big to manage? Do we have some sort of plan to deal with that?
Well, embroidered is going to be the saving grace for everything, isn't it? I think. Yeah, I mean, it's a very real risk. I mean, are we going to have 6,000 in another 10 years? And we can see how these things creep in over time. We've we've got years worth of very impactful work that we can do ahead of us. So hopefully Embroider helps a lot with that. And we're at the point now where we don't have, I know I used the term before, and a lot of juice left to squeeze in terms of, like, say, build times and things. We're really banking on Embroider and hopefully running on Vite and using modern JS build tools to be able to help us down that path. Once you get your route splitting and things like that, I think, we still got the managing all these routes, which is an effort in itself. I'm sure we can probably delete a number of them as well. I'd imagine there's a whole bunch there that don't need to be there anymore.
That's a question in Zoom. What tips do you have for smaller teams, for example, 2 people, for handling changes such as switching to the Embroider, migrating to sort of the next big Ember version, the next major Ember version, and so on?
Like tips on actually just how to do it, or how to wind that in and convince people to let you do it, is it?
I guess for how to find time to do that.
Yeah. I guess
that stuff, and how to approach it, maybe breaking down, whatever.
I guess it makes a lot of sense in my brain in terms of if you value being able to ship stuff and you have an edge on your customers because of the speed you can get product out in front of your customers, test it and validate it, then it kind of becomes a no-brainer, like to have people being able to enable the engineers to do this. So it's trickier when you got 2 people, a 2-person team, or a small team, or a couple of small teams. It's definitely much harder. And I don't have any magic word. Like, we've all been in those teams, including myself, where you're begging the product manager to give us a week to be able to update this, and it takes 2, and then you don't get to finish it even then. But I think changing the narrative a little bit and understanding that this work enables your engineers and how valuable that actually is to be shipping stuff. If you got people having broken pipelines and not being able to ship, that's actually a problem. And as I said, we consider that a P1 here. Like, that's like get the pipeline green again so people can resume shipping. And I think when you look at it that way, I think that really helps.
So I'd imagine Intercom are not the only company who could benefit from some of the work that you folks are doing. So is it in your remit as well to ship some of that stuff back to the community, or does that ever factor into your decisions on what you're going to work on?
So like the actual physical code things, that the tools we're giving to the engineers? Yeah, some of the tools
maybe you're building, or some of those improvements that maybe people outside Intercom could potentially adopt and help them.
Yeah, I mean, we're open to making stuff available when it makes sense, for sure. Like, yeah, do you have a specific example of the stuff that I was talking about?
No, not really. Yeah. I'm just curious if there's certain tooling you're building that also could make for a good open source kind of contribution.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing really comes to mind at the moment. There's a lot of cool stuff we're doing around observability, which I think a lot of the industry could probably benefit from, because you don't hear many people talking about observability and front end stuff. But even then, there's not so much custom stuff. It's more about kind of doing it. And there's maybe stuff we could open source, and we would at some point, I think. We're not closed to that at all.
There is technically something open source already. Into the Future was Pat's idea.
There you go.
He didn't do any of the work on the code, but I was like, it was literally stealing his idea and bringing it. And I just texted him and said, do you mind if I open source Lintbot and Brightspot as well? And he said, yep, we can do that. So it'll be coming soon. So.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the stuff is not necessarily even packages and code. Sometimes it's concepts and ideas and talking about this sort of stuff. And we do try and talk in the community and things like that. And we want to do more of that as well. So this has been supporting Ember at Intercom from the perspective of a front-end enablement team. And that's a wrap. Peter, Mandy, Cleaner, and myself will be around for the evening. So if you want to riff on any of this stuff, we love chatting about it. So I'd love to talk to you more about it later on when we're done. Thanks a lot.